Hi, this is Karu. You're looking at a Sequentially Years vlog. Good to see all of you again, all 8 of you. Hi. So, jump right into things. Last night I saw Kingsmen: The Secret Service, and that of course was based on a comic book by Mark Millar with Dave Gibbons from Watchmen actually doing the art. Fantastic art, by the way. And it was directed by Matthew Vaughn, the same director of Kick-Ass, who obviously he's worked with Millar to translate his comic books into movies before. And, you know, I figured it's based on a comic book. I'll get the comic, I'll go see the movie, I'll come home, I'll read the comic, and then I will do a nice comparison video for you here. And, so let me start by saying that I adored Kingsman. Kingsman: The Secret Service is fantastic as a film. It has its problems, yes, but they are, you know, I can overlook them in favor of how good this movie was, and it really was a very, very good movie. Now, it is based on, again, a Mark Millar comic, so I expected that I would not like the comic as much, in the same way that I didn't really like the comic of Wanted as much, and I didn't really like the comic of Kick-Ass as much. I thought that they just worked better as movies, and in this case of Kick-Ass, that's really Matthew Vaughn's work. That being said, I did not actually expect to hate this comic as much as I did. Wow, I cannot begin to accurately describe... I'm going to try my best here to describe how bad this comic is, but I cannot begin to accurately describe how truly miserable this comic is, especially in comparison to the much, much better movie. I've got notes. I was actually up until almost 2 a.m. reading these comics last night. And even then, I was up probably another hour and a half or more afterward because I could not sleep because my brain would not shut off thinking about how bad these comics were and what I would say here. I've got notes. So if you just see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my notes here, because I want to make sure that I cover all of this. So let's start with some of the basics just to lay this out. First of all, the comic is called The Secret Service, not Kingsman: The Secret Service, because the Kingsman concept is entirely for the movie, and the movie is much the better for it. Partially because, and this is not really a fault of the comic, it's just a personal preference, but because the Kingsmen as a group is so small, there's only a handful of them, and they're kind of based on the Knights of the Round Table concept. Each of them has a code name based on one of the knights, and you can only have so many and all that. As a result, it means that all of these characters are more important, and you can buy that, Galahad, or Harry, Colin Firth's character, is so remarkably important to the organization. You can buy that Eggsy, the main character who is trying to he's trying to add into it, that he's not just, you know, they can't just hire him and be like, well, if he can't do it, then we've got 5 other guys who can. No, it's every single person in this organization counts, and therefore it makes sense that they would have such stringent qualifications to enter. Yeah, as just the Secret Service, it takes away a lot of the mystique, it takes away a lot of the really fun aspects of things, and I'm going to get to that in a bit, but suffice it to say, yeah, the whole Kingsman concept is purely... I'm sorry, my allergies are killing me. Is purely for the movie, not the comic, so just ignore that happens. Harry/Galahad in the comic is Jack, who is Gary. Gary is the main character. Gary is Eggsy in the movie. In the comic, he's just Gary, and his name was Eggsy, I believe, in the movie, or his name was Gary in the movie, but they called him Eggsy. It was a nickname. And Jack is actually Gary's uncle, in this. And for some reason I had the sense in the movie that Harry was going to turn out to be Eggsy's uncle. I don't know why. I think maybe it was in an earlier version of the script, and there may have been enough clues that it ticked me off, clicked off in my head over it. But anyway. So, let's start by saying that while Eggsy and Harry are just really likable characters and really, just a lot of fun to be around, Gary and Jack are not. They are miserable, they are arrogant, and the comic wants you to think that that's what they should be. The comic really wants you to think that these kind of over-the-top alpha male jerk-offs who are totally devoid of charm are supposed to be, the ideal. This is what we're going for. And it really kind of fails on that level, just so goddamn hard. And, the other one thing that the movie does really well is that it humanizes Eggsy to a huge degree, and it does it in subtle ways. You can see how he interacts with his baby sister, for example, to see that he really is a good guy. Whereas the comic does it largely through exposition, through telling us how good a guy Gary is. And we don't actually see it most of the time. We see him as basically being a jerk. Jerk, beginning to end. I mean, and again, just, it's how you aim your jerkitude, apparently, that makes you a good guy or a bad guy. I'm not even sure at this point, but for example, though, at one point they talk about how getting him into the Secret Service, which I guess is MI6 in this, maybe. I'm not sure whether they're setting those up as separate or whether they were the same. It was hard to tell based on the dialogue. But I'm going to say MI6. Actually, no, I'll say the Secret Service for now, just to keep that consistent. So, it doesn't really say... At one point they say, well, how is he going to get into the Secret Service, even with his uncle pushing him because he was arrested in these riots last year, which, okay, fine. That's good. And then we get one kind of throwaway line where he was caught for stealing a bag of basmati rice in the middle of a riot. And it was a very odd detail for a couple of reasons. First being that in the middle of a riot, do you really think the police are going after the guy stealing a bag of rice? Secondly, why basmati rice? What was the did Mark Millar have sort of a plot thread where he was going to make it, he was stealing food for his family? Because that's what I expected. I expected that, yeah, he was taking advantage of the rise to steal food for his family because they're poor and they need food, and, a very Jean Valjean stealing bread thing, and they drop it. They just completely forget about that. Like, why did you give us this very specific detail that makes no sense in context, and then just, okay, we're gonna forget about that now. What? Huh? Part of what makes the comic not nearly as good as the movie is really just over the top. I mean, we're just going crazy, all sorts of stuff happening. They really do a good job of, the fight scenes are all way overplayed. You can see, they're cartoonishly violent in many respects, and as a result, that sort of draws away from any actual sense of violence because it is just so crazy too much that you can't see it as real. But as a result, also results in some amazing fight scenes. The choreography was fantastic. The direction, especially in one fight scene toward the end, and this is somebody else's idea, but I like how they put it. There's a fight scene toward the end where it's Colin Firth versus about 50 fanatics. Like religious fanatics. And he's fighting them, and the camera is moving around him, and it's moving at a breakneck pace, but he is steady in the shot, so you can see that, it's not him losing control, it's not craziness all around. He has a perfect idea of what is going on, and everything that he does is very precise, and the camera work works with it. We don't really get to see any of those types of fight scenes in the Secret Service. And more to the point, we don't get a lot of the over-the-topness. In the movie, the villain is just so super villainous and so stereotypical at times that you can't take him seriously, and as a result, he becomes fun. And with the Secret Service, everything is pretty much realistic, except for certain things, and it makes those certain things stand out more as a reason. For example, when Gary first gets to the school where he's supposed to spend 3 years, he ends up spending 2.5 because he's so awesome and he graduates early. He's supposed to spend 3 years learning how to do spy stuff. And at one point they're talking about all the stuff that he gets to do, and it's learn how to use all these cool guns, and, you know, here's where we invent all of our super tech spy stuff. And, oh yeah, we're going to teach you how to have really good sex. You're going to be the best lover ever because we're going to teach you how to do that. And I'm, really? Really, guys? No, this is just way over the top because otherwise you are just a government bureaucracy. You know, they have them going out into the real world and doing spy stuff for training. So, for example, in order to learn how to steal cars, they make it a thing where all of the trainees have to steal cars of important people. So one of them apparently stole a Maserati from a German diplomat? And it's like, guys, these are trainees. Do you want them to not... If they fail miserably, do you want to cause an international incident? Another one stole the Queen... of course, Gary had to over the top, so he stole the Queen's car. Because, you know, that's another thing, is that the comic wants to portray Gary as both hyper-competent and super incompetent. Because, you know, on one hand, he's from a low-class background, so he's not very smart, and on the other hand, he has a natural intelligence, which, whatever the hell that means. He has very low test scores, but somehow he knows everything, and he's so good at everything that he does. And often... he's not really that good, but the comic keeps telling us how awesome he is. For example, again, this is one of those training in real life things. Apparently, when you're training for the British Secret Service, you have to go out and perform an assassination on a random person that they assign to you. So, in this case, they assigned Gary and his partner to a bunch of drug dealers, one of which recognized Gary at one point. And their assassination plan was literally walk up to them while Gary is talking about the immorality of this, and is it really right, is it really wrong? Which, okay, good, that's character development. We're starting to get some idea that maybe this guy doesn't think that random killing is a good idea. Excuse me. And then he has this conversation in front of the guys they're supposed to kill. So those guys pull out their guns. His partner shoots one of them in the eye. The other three somehow only shoot his partner in the arm, and Gary pulls out a gun and shoots the other three. And then they go back and talk about how awesome Gary did. What? He talked about assassinating people in front of the assassination targets. Their plan was walk up to them and shoot them in the face. That's not an assassination. That's just a killing. That's not clever. What? I could do that. I don't need British Secret Service training to walk up to somebody and shoot them in the face. What? Let's see here. What else do we got here? Yeah, a lot of this reads like a 12-year-old wrote it. Especially the sex stuff, because the main characters are, of course, super good at sex, and we have to hear about it. It has to be made explicit how amazing they are in bed by them. You know, and I get that they're trying to go for the James Bond. James Bond was always suave and good with the ladies and obviously good in bed, but part of what worked in James Bond, both in terms of the books and the movies, was that he didn't brag about how good he was in bed. That's part of what made him cool, is that he wasn't sitting there saying, well, you know, I'm amazing in the sack. Have I ever gone down on you? Because if I had, you'd have remembered it. No, James Bond doesn't do that. That's part of what makes him cool. And watching both Gary and Jack talk about how amazing in bed they are now. Just, And, well, that reminds me. That leads into the next point. Alright, I'm going to say this because you're my fans, and this is important for you to understand. Mark Millar hates you. If you in any way identify as geeky or nerdy or like, those types of pastimes, Mark Millar thinks you are pathetic. He thinks you are stupid. He thinks you are out of touch. Mark Millar does not like you. So stop buying his books. And, alright. So first of all, if you read Kick-Ass, you will know that the comic for Kick-Ass makes it very, very clear that Mark Millar thinks that comic fans are pathetic. He really just is so condescending toward comic book fans in Kick-Ass. In the Secret Service, it is even worse. Again, unlike Kingsmen, where our main villain is Valentine, he's played by Samuel L. Jackson, just absolutely... Jackson does a good job of both chewing the scenery and also, playing a kind of interesting character. And Valentine is an interesting character. He is a combination of stereotypes, but he embraces it. The way I put it coming out of the theater was that he's sort of the evolution of Mr. Glass from Unbreakable, in the sense that he is aware of the tropes and sort of takes pleasure in either enacting them or specifically being subversive of them. He knows what should be happening. He knows he is basically in a spy film. And that's okay, and that's great, and it works. The villain in the comics, Dr. James something? I can't remember his name now. He is just your bog standard geek. Their plot is basically the same. Their plot is the world is overpopulated, and the only way to save most of humanity is to turn humanity into killers using cell phones that broadcast a certain signal that will cause everybody to become homicidal, just sincerely, randomly homicidal, kill off most of the world, and then the few remaining people get to, enjoy the rest of the world the way that they want it, and they don't have to worry about global warming or, climate change, anything like that. It's a silly, over-the-top plot in either case, but I'm willing to accept it because it can be made fun. And with Valentine, it was fun. With Dr. What's-His-Face, it's not fun. He has no personality to speak of. In fact, because Mark Millar hates nerds so much, he specifically just made him sort of a combination of his fandoms. Valentine's plan is to get important, powerful, rich people and make sure that their lives are saved among everybody else that might survive. 7 billion people, about 1 billion is left to survive at the end. But he wants to make sure that the rich and powerful are safe so that they owe him. In the comic, Dr. What's-His-Face wants to make sure that his heroes from science fiction and fantasy, writing in comic books and movies survive because he's a geek. And he wants to make sure that they'll continue making entertainment for him. I am just floored by how stupid this plan is. But, of course, again, Mark Millar has to get in his licks at nerds because he doesn't like us. He does not like us, and he wants... And we're supposed to think that his jerk-off main characters in Gary and Jack are the heroes, and they're fighting this nerd menace. It's really somewhat... It is pathetic to see the author insert going on there. It just... I can't even... I cannot even. So, alright, so... That's another point is, again, these characters are supposed to be our heroes, but there's nothing heroic about them. Again, a lot of this is they're trying to parody James Bond. James Bond was a good guy. He was not... Yes, he was arrogant, but he was not mean to people beneath him. And in this comic, the characters are just mean. They are nasty people. There's one scene in which Gary goes back to his home, to a bar where his stepfather is. And keep in mind, his stepfather and his mother in the comic... his mother is completely unlikable. She is a terrible person. She laughs while his stepfather has his little brother roll joints for them. She is just not likable at all. In the movie, she's really likable. The stepfather's a jerk. He's over the top, but again, I'm okay with that. That's fine. We need that sort of thing. Suffice to say, though, in the comic, he goes to this bar to confront his stepfather and his stepfather's friends. And instead of getting a fight scene, like we would expect, what we get instead is he uses a device that basically paralyzes all of them, and then brutally beats them with a pool cue and a glass jar. Mark Millar, what were you thinking? Why would you think that? Why am I supposed to like a guy who paralyzes somebody and then beats them up when they can't fight back? And hospitalizes... Why am I supposed to like this guy? There is nothing likable about this guy. Nothing at all. Here, am I missing anything here? In both the movie and in the comic, there is a kind of running theme. Harry collects the newspaper clippings from the front page for every time he has saved the world. And the point is that the newspaper clippings are always something innocuous. It's always something dumb that has nothing to do with saving the world. The idea being that, that Harry/Jack is not there for the fame. They are there to do what's right and to serve the public good and all that. And it's okay. In fact, it's better if the world has no idea what's going on. And I like this idea as a concept. A little bit of just spoiler territory here, if I haven't spoiled enough already. In the movie, Valentine's plan starts to work, and we get 2 minutes, roughly, of the world trying to start beating each other up before it ends. And they stop him, and that's fine. In the book, we get 19 minutes of Gary breaks into the bad guy's lair, and without his knowing, his friend reprograms the bad guy's computer, Dr. What's-His-Face, so that instead of making everybody hate each other and try to beat each other up, it makes them it makes them all horny and makes them make out with whoever's nearby. And I remember reading this scene, and it shows, Paris and London and all that, and I'm looking for same-sex couples. And I'm not seeing any. Hi, Cat. I'm not seeing any in the thing, and that's because, of course, Mark Millar is saving the one same-sex bit as a joke on the cop who was very mean to Gary, because, of course, it has to be a gay joke. And, I guess this cop is now making out with a guy. Oh, Mark Millar. But suffice it to say, at the end of the movie, they don't revisit the whole news thing, and somebody that I was there with pointed out that in the comics they didn't. He had only flipped through the comics, skimmed through it a little bit. He's like, I kind of like that it kind of ends with that. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see that. This was before I read the comic. Having read the comic, it makes no sense that at the end, Gary hangs up a poster and it's about Elton John's problems adopting, front page. The entire world for 19 minutes was just making out with each other. And sure, they might not remember it, but there's video footage. They'll wake up and be like, oh, where'd my pants go? Why am I on top of this person? Why am I inside this person? That would have been front page news. I'm sorry, if it actually affects the entire world, that is front page news. You can't pretend that he secretly saved the world here. They might not know who Gary is, but the front page, even in a tabloid, is not going to be about Elton John's adoption woes. Sorry, it's just not. And you can't revisit that if the entire world has been affected. You can only revisit it if nothing happened to anybody else. And finally, the last thing is that in both Kingsmen and the Secret Service, there is sort of a running theme about where you come from affecting who you are, and how it really doesn't. In the Kingsmen, it is a much more blatant class clash, in the sense that Kingsmen are generally recruited from the aristocracy, from the from the children of the upper class, and Eggsy is from nowhere. But Colin Firth's character Galahad believes in him anyway and sees something in him. So, of course he proves that it's not important. Anyway, that is there to an extent within the Secret Service, but mostly it's about Jack trying to remember where he's from. And, it's got this whole undercurrent of, I was from nowhere, and I forgot about that, and I forgot about my family, and now I've got, now I've learned to care about my family again, and it came out of nowhere. It was really just half-assed. If it wasn't there in monologue at the end, I probably would not have grabbed that lesson out of it. Whereas Kingsman did a lot of really good things with it. The bad guy Valentine is also a sort of low-class guy, but he has never risen above his station, and there's always this message that being a gentleman is not about your birth, it's about your actions, and it really it works very, very well in the movie. One of the things that I found particularly amusing is the head of the Kingsmen, Arthur, is Michael Caine, who very famously has a Cockney accent. He's got this working man accent. Eggsy, there are a couple of times where he brings up My Fair Lady as a movie that he likes and that he sees himself in, with Colin Firth being his Henry Higgins and him being Eliza Doolittle. And at one point he asked Colin Firth, are you going to work on the how I speak, basically? Are you going to make me sound like a gentleman? And Colin Firth tells him it's not about how you sound, it's about feeling comfortable in your skin and all that. But I just found that somewhat amusing that, the head of the Kingsmen, who is sort of the guy who is most on the side of the establishment, and we use the aristocracy and we have traditions, is the guy who sounds like he is from a working class background, because the actor is. And they even bring that up, and I think that's actually kind of great. But that's just me being a super nerd. Which means Mark Millar hates me twice as much, obviously. But yeah, I've rambled on for a while now. I don't even know how long. Suffice it to say, go see The Kingsman. See The Kingsman and enjoy the hell out of it, because I did. I loved every minute of it, beginning to end. It was so good. And so well put together, and these characters are so fantastic. I didn't even get into, half of what I could talk about here with, Galahad being the pure one, so Valentine didn't even try to corrupt him, and there's a female supporting character that is good friends with Eggsy, that there's no romantic subplot between the two of them. It's really they're really just friends. They're good friends, and they're partners, and they work well together. I could just go on and on and on. It is just really good. Do not read The Secret Service. Just don't. Don't waste your money on it. Don't waste your time on it. Excuse me. Just leave it alone. It is miserable. It is boring. It is nonsensical. I finished it around 2 a.m. I wanted to go to the theater and just, knock on doors and find somebody to open up the theater so I could watch Kingsman again just to get the terrible taste of that comic out of my mouth. It's... oh, so awful. Just leave it alone. Go watch Kingsman. Watch Kingsman, watch it 3 times, watch it 5 times, make it the biggest hit since Guardians, because that's the most fun I've had at a film since Guardians. Just make it huge, blow it up, go see Kingsman, but leave the Secret Service behind and tell Mark Millar that we have no interest in his stupid stuff unless it's filtered through Matthew Vaughn's much, much more talented lens. Alright, thanks a lot, and take care.